never thought I would have to make this speech to an NDP government, at least not within months of their election. The decision to ignore evidence and proceed with Site C is much worse than Christy Clark's decision to greenlight Site C. At least Christy did not promise her decision would be guided by evidence, an open, fair, and transparent review by the BCUC. The NDP Site C review process turned out to be a sham. My clients were assured by the Premier in person, by the Finance Minister in person, that the BCUC review would guide the Site C decision and would be open, fair, and transparent. It was on this basis that Ken and Arlene Boone agreed to participate in good faith, put their own efforts and time into making this review work. It was on this basis that they agreed to abide by the outcome. Well, that's all off now. In a couple of hours, Premier Horgan will announce the decision to complete building Site C. He will say it was the most difficult decision he's ever had to make. He carefully considered all the evidence. And we need this for climate change. Bullshit. This is a divisive decision. It is totally unconscionable. It runs roughshod over Indigenous rights, destroys farmland, wrecks the environment. And all because, for some reason, we have to fight climate change. You do not have to choose between climate change and human rights. Let me say that again. You do not have to choose between fighting climate change and human rights. We have presented alternatives that enable you to have everybody on board. This only became a difficult decision when Premier Horgan had to figure out how to ignore the BCUC report and still make the decision-making process appear open, fair, and transparent. So what did he do? He invited 6 experts to make a presentation to Cabinet on November 30th. Our international energy expert, Robert McCullough, with 40 years of experience and no horse in the race, made a very well-received case in favor of cancelling Site C. How do I know? On Friday, I bumped into Jeff Meggs on the BC Ferries, and he told me McCullough made a very good presentation. What did Robert McCullough say? Well, it's all subject to Cabinet confidentiality, what was discussed afterwards, but I can highlight 3 of his most important points, and they're in the fact versus fiction handout you've just received. BC is awash in untapped renewable energy potential. BC Hydro places the wind potential of the province at 4 times that of Site C, meeting all of BC's decarbonization electrification goals without even considering solar and geothermal. BC also has backup for intermittent renewables, although you would have never known when you talked to BC Hydro. And it is not, Site C is not needed for LNG if that magical idea ever comes to light again. And the reason is that wind backed by storage is more than sufficient to meet all the requirements. Electricity doesn't come in different colors. Electricity is electricity. And everywhere else in the world, people are using wind and solar backed up by storage. And we have tons of storage at Mica to deal with that. Second thing, BC's AAA rating was just confirmed and will not be downgraded by Site C. To hear the media and journalists, they're just reporting what they're told. There's going to be a massive rate hike. The world will end as we know it for ratepayers if we stop Site C. BC is already financing the $2.1 billion in sunk costs with 30-year bonds at a cost of $57 million per year. Not $300 or $400 million per year. That's just rubbish. Even if the inflated $1.8 billion in termination costs are added, cancelling Site C will save ratepayers at least $266 million per year, or $123 per household in 2024. Why? Because the dam is a hugely expensive project, and it'll be ratepayers that pay the price if it proceeds. The other point was that the Columbia River entitlement is an asset that could be monetized for billions of dollars for infrastructure. So, that's what Robert McCullough said. Then, the NDP did what every government, or governments that I've dealt with for the last 16 years, do when consulting with First Nations. And I represent lots of First Nations from. Tick that box. We talk to an expert. Put it in the bottom drawer. You know what we call this in the First Nations world? Drive-by consultation. Hi, how are you? And then off we go and do what we're going to do anyway. My mom, who I grew up in Oak Bay, who used to call it accommodate and disregard. Listen carefully and then disregard it all. Well, that's what's happened here. How do I know that Robert McCullough was listened to and then ignored? He came to the exact opposite conclusion to BC Hydro and energy and finance officials, and the phone never rang. After November, the phone never rang. Nobody was interested, despite his offer to provide follow-up detail. If you are set on proceeding with Site C rather than basing a decision on persuasive evidence, what's the best course of action? Ignore the evidence. Don't check it out. Don't ask for the analysis. Don't go, oh my gosh, he's saying that it's only going to cost this much per year. We're saying this much. Oh, it's different. What should we do? Well, maybe we should sit down and try and work through it. That's interest-based negotiation. That's real consultation, not drive-by consultation like what we have here. Now, I know that many NDP supporters, and I don't vote NDP, and members are ashamed of their government, as they should be. This was not what they voted for. It is business as usual in BC. Hold a lockup, invite world energy expert Keith Baldry to review and challenge your justification for proceeding with Site C. Give him an hour or so, spin your message, present a PowerPoint and background, make sure nobody gets to test the underlying analysis before announcing Site C will proceed in a highly controlled news conference, which is what we're about to not be able to go to. And then throw in a few zingers like, oh, this is needed for climate change. We'll do a climate trust fund. You can bet this will all be spun as the only solution for climate change and everybody's going to be happy. And it was the toughest decision I ever made in my life, but we're doing the right thing by British Columbians. My clients who have lived this for the last 40 years do not accept a decision to complete building Site C on that basis. Period. Full stop. The era of decision-making in the back rooms is over. Doesn't matter whether it's NDP, Liberals, Greens, Rhino Party. Mark my words, this is the 21st century. My clients will never surrender the Peace Valley on the basis of such a flawed, politically motivated decision based on fake evidence. I am not counseling breaking the law. I'm not counseling breaking the law. But today, what I am saying is that my clients will continue to use every tool within Canadian law to prevent Site C proceeding and ensure that it's permanently cancelled. Today is not the beginning of the end to opposition to Site C, but it may be the beginning of the end of the NDP government. Any self-respecting NDP MLA should not accept this decision. Today, Premier Horgan has chosen a path of confrontation and exclusion that will divide his party, not a path of reconciliation and inclusion that brings British Columbians, including First Nations, together. This is not the leadership those who voted for the NDP were promised. He has chosen to pit us against each other rather than bring us together. He has chosen to ignore the fact that international human rights, talk to Amnesty International, there's no exemption for dams. Oh, we can breach human rights, we can trash Indigenous rights, we can trash the environment because we're building a dam. There is no exception to international human rights for building the Site C dam. So let me just leave it there. In case there's any uncertainty about where my clients stand on Site C, they will not surrender the Peace Valley on this basis. They will use every tool available to them to stop Site C until there never will be, but until there's a real process. And frankly, they just want to see it stop. And what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing, the same thing Steve Gray has pointed out, people from across this province, not just in the Peace Valley, are saying enough is enough. And a lot of them are NDPers who say they've been terribly betrayed by this. Thank you.
Welcome back. We're filming now on Wednesday, December 20th, and we're going to be talking about Site C. I'll just say what I think, a complete betrayal, a disaster for the people and the environment of this province. And I think Mr. Horgan's Site C decision shows who really runs this province. Corporate Canada runs the province, and the rest of us are largely irrelevant. That's what we're going to be talking about. Walter McGuinness and Mehdi Najari. And Mehdi, what happened? Why do you think the NDP did what they did?
Jack, I think we should talk about first about what NDP was standing before the election in 2000, for example, 15, when the BC government announced that they are going to go with Site C Dam. The NDP, John Horgan, came with an alternative plan to Site C. And this is what they said, Power BC, alternative.
Better plan, brighter future.
Yes, better plan and brighter future. And he called it John Horgan's Energy and Job Plan for BC. And what he did, he said, is that Power BC is a bold, progressive plan for the future of BC energy. Protect our farmland and natural environment, respect First Nation land title, protect BC hydro consumer from runaway bills, and produce good-paying job close to home in every community.
My God, the exact opposite of what he's done.
And then there is several pictures in that so-called plan, the brochure. Mr. Horgan is getting his picture with the solar farm in Kimberley, and then he take his picture with Cape Scott windmill, wind farm, and then take his picture recharging a electric car in Fernie, British Columbia. So he is just saying that this is the future, and he doesn't want to be stuck in past, And he, for example, some of the statement was, for every dollar spent retrofitting, create twice as many jobs as the dam construction. And his plan has 4 planks, and one was retrofitting public building, retrofitting homes and businesses, maximizing existing hydroelectricity because some dam is not to their potential, the existing dam, and invest in clean energy. This was the 4, and he was really giving example after example that how the future should be for the benefit of the people of British Columbia. This plan was really the foundation of their platform for the next election, 2017 election. I want to quote Vaughan Palmer, Vancouver Sun, November 18, 2015. Power BC, after Power BC was launched by Mr. Horgan. The alternative energy pitch is part of calculated outreach to younger, technologically savvy voters, and it has allowed him to portray Premier Christy Clark as the person stuck in the 1950s. So that was the basis of all the vote they got. Tuesday announcement was framed as a framework and the first step toward building opposition platform for the next election. So it was the core of their platform. This is what they promised. This is how they got the vote during the election. So we expect when he come, and he always said we are going to have an independent BCUC look at the Site C and alternative. So after he come to power, what he did, in my opinion, before even BCUC was formed, he showed his hand. When he continued the construction of Site C, because every day that construction was continued, $2 million was spent. So for 150 days after Mr. Horgan come to power until he made this decision, that's $300 million were add up to a project that he was ridiculing in past and calling it being a stock in past, you know. And we have better and cheaper alternative. He was always talking about it. The second thing he did, he got rid of the person that was the head of the BC Hydro and was politically chosen by liberals to be there to carry their orders, and put the person that was in charge of building Site C dam as promoting him to the top job. So if you put the person that is promoting and building the Site C, that under the Christy Clark government, you don't promote him. You put a fresh set of eyes there to watch and to be unbiased.
And he was made the CEO of
Mr. Chris O'Reilly was made the CEO, and this is the same person that gave us public misinformation. He gave misinformation to BCUC, and so on and so forth. And until he was continuing saying that the Site C is on the budget and on time until October 6th, when through the Freedom of Information, Bob McKay and others find out it's not.
So just a minute, you said he was giving misinformation to BCUC. And what was the misinformation?
It was on the fact that he was saying that that Site C is on time and on budget, and it wasn't. They knew before that it wasn't, you know. So why do you promote Mr. Horgan unless you want to really continue Site C? And all this nonsense, all this shenanigan is just pretending that you are setting up a BCUC to look at it independently. In his announcement, when he said the other day that he is going to continue with the Site C, he said that unfortunately the old government made a mistake and started the Site C, made a mistake. This is not intentional. We know it was intentional. So he's calling it mistake now. Mistake can be forgiven, but if you intentionally putting people of this province, burdening them with huge debt, that's the room for inquiry, you know.
Yeah.
And really, we should just emphasize that I think, and I think you also both think, that one of the big reasons for Site C is to put BC Hydro and the people of British Columbia much more deeply into debt. And in fact, we've got
and to put them in debt, and then when the debt get over our head, then we have to have a fire sale,
right,
selling the BC public asset to the business community. That's
exactly
what it is. So he said that the old government brought the Site C dam to the point of no return. If the old government brought it to the point of no return, Mr. Horgan, then why did you, after you come to power, you start BCUC review? Because it already was to the point of no return. And that's nonsense. He is fibbing, really. It's not at the point of no return. BCUC didn't say it was at the point of no return. The Joint Review Commission said it's not at the point of no return. In fact, Dr. Harry Swain, which is an honorable man, and we should be proud of many honorable people that came and testified and said, don't do this. Is not in public interest. You know, we have Dr. David Wardy from Newfoundland writing the letter. Don't do the same mistake that we did. You know, we have Dr. Owen Finn and many others. We have wonderful journalists like Andrew Nikiforik and Sarah Cox of the Small Canada writing wonderful article informing people that this is not for public interest.
On the other hand, our province's corporate media made it seem like it was a 50-50 decision.
No, the corporate media in Vancouver, including Vancouver Sun, including Globe and Mail, including even Times Colonist,
and CBC,
they have become cheerleader for the corporate agenda, you know. So he allowed, right from the beginning, he showed his intention that he is not going to stop Site C, you know. And when the report came out, then as they start attacking BCUC. You know, the construction union, they got together and they formed this pressure group By November 15, 16, they came out and attacked the credibility of BCUC report, which was all nonsense. But they created an impression that there is problem with the report and there is inaccuracy with the report, which there is none. You know, it is accurate. It's a wonderful report. They did a great job in a short period of time. And by doing that, they created an opening for Mr. Horgan to create these new sets of excuses. And they said, he came out and said, I'm going to protect the people of British Columbia, the ratepayers, from shock increase in the rate. And where is the shock increase in the rate? If we stop Site C, you get shock increase in the rate, which is nonsense. It's absolutely a bunch of lies they wove together in order to create fear among the public and make themselves look savior of the British Columbia.
So many, you know, I know Carol James and John Horgan's always, they took the position that the BC government credit rating could be downgraded if we cancel Site C. Now, was that ever a possibility?
Where is the proof? Show us the proof. You know, all these negativity around BCUC report, none of these people go to the BCUC and show their evidence. It's just to create impression. Sometimes creating impression is more important than truth.
Yeah.
Because if you can deceive people with lies and create an impression that John Horgan is really their savior, instead of a person that is putting a huge burden on the people of this province. Why? Because corporation and big business want Site C.
Yes.
You know, who was supporting Site C? The Fraser Institute, the businessman in Vancouver. They are the ones that are going to benefit. We are the ones that are going to pay. And if this boondoggle continue, we are going to have a huge cut in social expenditure to pay for this boondoggle. And believe me, they see, it's so how funny it is. Until just recently, they were saying that it is 8.3 billion. BCUCCOM is said is at least 10 billion. Mr. Horgan, in a month, you know, in a month, increased it to 11 billion because 10.7 plus another 330 million for, added to contingency plan. So that's 11.3 billion.
Yes, yes. I've noticed it's up to 11 billion now, 10.7.
So how much of the job is done? Less than 20%. In less than 20%, they raised the, you know, and in 8 months, they raised from 8.3 to 11 billion and
11 billion.
30 million, something like that. So this is only 20% of the work is done. Wait until 50% is done, or 70%.
Also, I think it was Mr. McCullough, I don't know what his credentials were, but he consulted with the people in the Peace River Valley about the economics of it. And he had actually said that he wrote a letter to David Eby that some of you might have seen, in which he was trying to straighten out these issues. And he was saying that British Columbia's credit rating wasn't going to be downgraded for canceling the site, but it could very likely be downgraded if you proceed with building it, because you're stuck with a dam that's worth $4 billion, but you end up paying $12 billion for it. So it's just like if you bought a car, if you bought a car that was worth $4,000, or worth $4,000, but you paid $12,000 for it, anybody would look at you and say, well, that's not a very good financial decision.
Dr. David McCullough is from Oregon. He's an economist and an energy expert. And he was many times here explaining why the Site C should not go ahead, is against public interest. He went to BCUC and show and provide all his information and record and evidence and facts. You know, it's really obligation to Mr. Horgan say which one of those facts is not right, that you didn't make decision as the facts show.
Mehdi, you have, and Walt, you also have a couple of graphs.
Yeah, Mehdi brought this graph last week. I'm going to hold it up and maybe you guys can get a shot of it. Now, Mehdi, just go over this one more time. What are we looking at here?
What we are looking at here, the graph is from University of UBC study, and it shows the forecasted energy. This is the forecast. This is not the real energy used in BC. This is how they forecast from.
Is that BC Hydro's forecast?
Yes.
Okay.
This what BC Hydro say we are going to use in 2009 and so on and so forth. But the actual usage is this line. It's way down. The accuracy of BC Hydro information, it shows that they are over forecasting in order to justify building Site C.
Right.
And Dr. Harry Swine said, this is the height of stupidity. We don't need this. We don't need this energy for 20 years. Even if when they build it, we said this several times, that if they build it, let's say they are going to come through and by 2024 they build it. You know, by that time, we don't need that energy at least for another 10 years. You know?
Yeah.
And every year that we produce energy from Site C, we are going to lose money to a tune of $200 to $400 million. For that 10 years, it's going to be around $4 billion more on the back of every citizen in this province.
And that's exactly the plan.
Yeah.
Walt, if you can hold this graph so Mehdi can...
Okay.
Other way.
Sorry.
This one is from another, is from Norm Farrell blogs, and it showed the amount of debt that we had. This is the amount of debt we had in 1992.
This is the provincial debt.
After the social credit government left the office, it was around 20 billion. And when the NDP left the office, the total debt was around 35 billion. And when the business government, the wonderful business government of Campbell and Christy Clark were in power, that brought us to the golden age, this is the amount of debt increase. And it showed that now the total government debt obligation is around $170 billion.
Okay, so in 2001, when the NDP left office, the debt was about 40 billion.
About 35 billion.
Okay, and now it's at 107, almost 170 billion.
Yes.
And you know, we're always told by the media and everybody else that the Liberals are the ones who we can count on to protect us. They're going to take care of business. Look what they've done. Look what they've done. Now the NDP is going to do their part with Site C.
And now NDP learned to have this deferral account.
Yes.
So they are saying, oh, we are going, Mr. Horrigan, the savior of the ratepayers, he's protecting ratepayers by having a freeze on the rate of BC Hydro. But the problem is, the day of reckoning will come a little bit later, after these guys are out of office, and then you and our children, me and everybody else, and our children are going to pay exuberant prices, because not only he deferred it, we are going to pay the interest rate on all this.
So I've got to ask a couple of questions. You know, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, in this day and age, that you could get politicians that make decisions on mythology. They don't have anything going for them. The NDP has no real reason. Financially, there's nothing. And we shifted, the financials always have shifted our attention away from more fundamental issues about human rights and the issues of food security, and also the devastating effect that this dam can have on the Peace River estuary that runs into Alberta, which is already starving for water and losing more water all the time. So, Mehdi, it just seems to me that this is a level of mistake that could bring down a government. Do you think it's possible that the NDP could fail on this?
It may, but it's not mistake, Walter.
Wow.
What it is, these guys are showing their hand.
Yeah.
You look, Minister of Environment and Minister of Energy and Mines, and John Horrigan is standing, and all of them are so sad, and you know, they made a difficult decision, but they had to make it. This is a picture that government took and send it to all the media, and all the media dutifully show it, because that's the impression they want to have in front of the public. Listen, Minister of Environment, Mr. George Heyman, he, as a Minister of Environment, is presiding over a project that is the biggest environmentally destructive in the history of Canada.
Yeah.
And he is approving it. Where is the integrity, Mr.
Yeah.
George Heyman? The Minister of Energy and Mines, she go in 2015 to Peace River and paddling in Peace River and telling the public that Peace River has to be run free and we are going to stop this project. And she's presiding over that. Where is your integrity, Michelle Mangal?
But this is my point, Mehdi.
And
yeah.
the same with Lana Popham. She talk all the time about agricultural land. This is going to be destroyed. 15 to 25,000 acres of agricultural land, the biggest destruction of agricultural land, and she's going to preside over it. Where is your guys' integrity? Why don't you resign your position and sit as an independent and represent your constituents and keep your integrity intact? None. There is 41 MLAs, none of them show an iota of integrity.
Okay, so, but this is exactly my point. If a number of NDP or MLAs set as independents, and if they really have integrity, they're going to vote against the government bills. Would that not be possible that they would bring the government down?
Not necessarily. They can go ahead and actually that would put pressure on John Horgan government to come with the progressive policies. You know? Because he can see that he cannot control his caucus.
Yeah.
Because his caucus, there are some members that have integrity, unlike him. But you know, this is what we need. We need people show, you know, that they are going to work for public interest, not corporate interest. If Mr. Horgan was honest with us, he would have said,
Mehdi,
Yes.
we'll have to forget about him
That's
being
okay.
honest with us because we're out of time and we're out of the overtime. Thank you all very much for watching. And following this is going to be an interview from a couple of years ago with Jessica Ernst. Yeah. And fracking.
Well, I understand now why people don't vote. I used to always think that there's always a differentiation between the parties, and you have to at least pick the least bad of the lot. But now, after this decision on Site C, I just feel that there's absolutely no difference between the BC NDP and the BC Liberals. So I totally understand why people can't be bothered to go and vote.
Hi, my name is Janet Gray, and I am a citizen of this beautiful province of British Columbia that I care deeply about. In fact, I believe that thousands and thousands of us care deeply about it, and we are feeling at a point of great concern that the government that we worked really hard to get in, and we're feeling like they were going to do what needed to be done to bring the people's voices of BC up after 17 years of not having them, that our voice has been betrayed, and we have over and over again done what was needed to make sure that the facts were dealt with around Site C. And they have come up, and guess what? The facts are that Site C is not a good deal, that Site C should be canceled. And we need leadership that show the guts and the concerns of the people of British Columbia and bring them forward, not the corporate solutions to business as usual. This is not business as usual. We have a future for our grandchildren, we have a future for this planet, and we need to start making strong decisions right now. And the decision to go ahead with this dam is not what I believe, and many other like me believe, is the heart and soul and the concerns of this province. We need to stop business as usual, and we need to make the moves and the steps forward in terms of reconciliation and in terms of addressing the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights, taking forward the 94 calls to action that Murray Sinclair put before us. We have a lot of work to do, and it doesn't mean that we should do it in a flippant way of saying that we've consulted and are going to carry on. that it's in the best needs of the peoples of British Columbia. It is not in the best needs of the people of this province. We all know deep down in our hearts that this is not the right decision and we need to stop it now.
Our guest in this segment is Jessica Ernst. Jessica lives in Alberta, about, I think you said, northwest of Calgary? Northeast of Calgary. And we're going to talk about fracking. Maybe, Jessica, you can start off by telling us what fracking is.
Well, very simply, fracking is drilling an energy well bore. That's all part of the process. Then they blast holes in the casing so that they can inject under great pressure frac fluids to shatter formation. They're after the unconventional resources, oil or gas, in a variety of formations, coal, sands, shales, and they have to shatter the formations to force the resources. How big an area is a fracked area when they're fracking one well, let's say? It depends on whether it's a vertical well or a horizontal well. Okay. Some of the companies now are drilling down, then going horizontal up to 3 kilometers. They can do numerous wells on one location. I just read, I think the highest that I've read so far is 67 wells on one pad. So they can cover quite a large area, but they're doing many wells in a very small area and then multiplying them many times. So fracking means fracturing. So what they do is they inject under a lot of pressure water and chemicals into the rock and essentially blow the rock up to release the gas. Yeah, a good way to visualize it. In fact, Encana has used this on their website, where if you imagine the cracks in a windshield when a rock hits it, and you see all these little cracks spread, that's what they're after. And it's the resources. The methane's a good example. It adheres to formation tightly. The conventional oil and gas used to build in pools, and it would flow by itself up a wellbore. These resources are reluctant. They're tight. They're tightly stuck to the formations, the oil and the gas. It does not flow freely, so they have to force it to let go. Is fracking safe? Is fracking safe? Well, in my experience, I live fracked now. I don't think so. I used to. I work in the industry. I have 30 years experience. I believed with proper laws and regulations, it could be done safely, but everywhere it seems that they're fracking, people are being killed, there are accidents, there's spilling of toxic fluids, drilling fluids, dumping, intentional dumping. Then the fracking of formations, the methane has now been released and it's leaking up well bores, getting into aquifers. There have been homes that have blown up in Pennsylvania directly caused by fracking, the gas releasing into water and into homes. My water is too dangerous to even have connected to my home. So where you live in Alberta, northeast of Calgary, you are on a well? I'm on a water well. My little neighboring community, though, I'm not in the hamlet of Rosebud. They're a population of about 100, and they have community wells as well, but it's a municipal water system, and their water got fracked as well. They have methane and ethane in that water. They get 40 to 50,000 visitors. They have a dinner theater there. There's a golf course, and there's little hotels. So they're also living with dangerous water. Are they drinking it? Yeah. Is it safe to drink? No, but the government says it is. Are you drinking your water on your well? No, I wouldn't drink it. Encana fractured right into our drinking water aquifers, and for years I've been trying to get the government and Encana to tell us what chemicals they injected, and we still don't know. Now, you said you have worked in the industry for 30 years. Doing fracking or researching fracking or? No. I didn't do fracking. Most of my work was consultation, which is what's very interesting about now living fracked, because the company did it in secret. And when people started asking questions, because water wells were going bad, they blatantly lied to us. They looked us right in the eye and lied. And they had already fracked our drinking water supply. You didn't know? No, and I work in the industry, and most of my work was consultation with communities, First Nations, guide trappers. Telling them what was safe? Yeah, no, not about fracking, other things, but environmental impact assessments, cumulative effects assessments, and socioeconomic assessments. And I was being fracked and didn't know, and of course having it done in secret and then being lied to, with the data not made public. It's very difficult to uncover what happened.
Now, there's a lawsuit. Who are you suing and why?
I am suing Encana Corporation. They're Encana's...
Good for you.
Well, thank you. They're Encana's largest natural gas producer. They're not the largest in the world, but I've been told they're one of the nastiest companies, most punitive. I'm also suing the Alberta government
Good.
for
Good.
unlawful activities as well as Encana's breaking the law. And I'm also suing the Energy Resources Conservation Board, our energy regulator.
In Alberta.
Yes, because they broke the law too. Not only did they break provincial laws, they violated my charter of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They violated my charter rights.
So when did the lawsuit begin?
We first filed the first legal papers in 2007 to save statute of limitations while we were trying to get the data. I've used freedom of information requests. It was refused me. I've spent thousands of dollars trying to get the data. It's been a full-time job trying to uncover the cover-up. We served the parties their first legal papers in 2008, and then we were allowed an amendment, and we went public with the lawsuit in April of 2011.
Now, I've never really heard about it, so although you went public, it hasn't been as big news as, for example, the Calgary, what's the name of the hockey team? Yeah, the Calgary Stampede.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, some of the media reported very well on it. Unfortunately, there's a big clampdown on media coverage of hydraulic fracturing. This is happening all over the world. Most of the time, the reports that I've read, a lot of the mainstream media are reporting verbatim the press releases the companies give them. Most of them are dishonest. A lot of them are blatant lies. And the real stories, I'm only one of many water contamination cases in Alberta. There's a lot of other families. The Zimmermans out of Wetaskiwin, their water got bad after nearby fracking. Ronald and Sean Campbell near Ponoka, Alberta. Bruce Jack near Spirit River, Alberta, after fracking nearby. Himself and 2 industry gas in water testers blew up in a very serious explosion when his water well ignited during a testing day by industry to test for the gases in his water.
So say that again, his well blew up?
The methane, his water well is so dangerously contaminated with methane and other hydrocarbons that when these 2 industry men came to find out where the gases were coming from, because they can fingerprint where they come from, and the methane in the water well ignited, created a terrible explosion, burnt down his pump house. All 3 men were seriously injured in hospital, Bruce Jack, for a month.
So, I mean, to me, I think fracking is an absolute disaster, an environmental nightmare. Ms. Christy Clark, our premier, is basing the future of the province on natural gas, which will be fracked. So you can see the direction we're going in. You mentioned that the judge in your case was removed by, well, maybe that's not the right word, but
Oh, it's a good word. I mean,
was removed by
yeah.
Stephen Harper.
Yeah, or the Stephen Harper government.
Yeah.
But can I come back to that? And I'd just like to go to your premier.
Okay.
One thing that the people of BC need to look at is the Site C dam expansion. The water and the electricity that is being told the people of BC need. I believe the Site C dam is that massive cost. That is being done for fracking. The electricity and the water, I think, will be for the fracking companies in the Horn River play. And the LNG, the liquefied natural gas at Kitimat and the other locations, needs massive energy. So they're going to get the electricity, not the people of British Columbia.
Yes.
And I don't believe your premier is being honest with the people at all. The premier might not even know the truth. Now back to how bad fracking is. Yes, indeed, I'm doing this lawsuit, and Encana has publicly said my case has no merit. It should be thrown out. But they did not argue that in court. We had a very important court hearing in January, and the most important part that I think of my lawsuit happened in that court hearing, where we get to decide, the judge has to decide whether or not a citizen of Alberta can sue the energy regulator for failing to protect a citizen and our groundwater, and if they can be sued for violating our Canadian Charter of Rights. And right before the judge was to rule, Prime Minister Harper, his government intervened and promoted the judge to the Court of Appeal, essentially removing her. My lawyers told me, when I told them about this, I was shocked, and they said, oh, don't worry, she will have to complete her ruling. of what she heard. So my lawyers asked her, will you be doing the ruling on what you heard? And she said, that's not an option. That's unconscionable and shocking. And all Canadians ought to be horrified by this, and none of the mainstream press reported on that. I'm horrified, I'm embarrassed to be Canadian by this, but the interesting contrast to that is the federal government intervened in a provincial lawsuit that supposedly has no merit. All of a sudden, Jack, I realized my lawsuit has massive power. I'm a little tiny citizen, a middle-aged citizen, and yet I have the federal government interfering in a provincial lawsuit. Plus, I think the Harper government reacted, which is not that good. All of a sudden, I realized my lawsuit's really important. I knew it was important. Now it's tremendously more important than I could have ever imagined.
So once again, we see this triumvirate of the corporations basically running roughshod over all of us, the politicians paving the way for them,
Yes.
making it easier for
Yes.
them to do whatever they want, and the media keeping the public in the dark and
Yes.
misinforming us. This is what we're up against, not only on your issue, but on 1,000 issues.
Well,
And
on your
if we-
Site C Dam, and the taxpayers are paying for it, and you're being misled about that. On many, many things. On the transmission lines. Yes, absolutely.
So now there's a new judge in your case, and he or she is going to make the decision.
Maybe, maybe not. It's been 6 months. The new judge is the Alberta Chief Justice, so he's actually a new judge for my case, but he's been around a while. I would have expected a judgment by now. Interestingly, April 15th, they had my lawyers and the judge in Encana and the defendants had their first sort of telephone conference call to introduce each other to the new judge. And the new judge said to Encana, is there any good reason you cannot file your statement of defense? And Encana couldn't come up with one. So they said, no, Your Honor, we'll file right away. It's now past July 15th. That's 3 months. After the first month, my lawyers asked Encana, when are you going to file? No later than June 15th. That came and went. Now a month has passed. We still have no statement of defense. We still have no judgment. I think everybody thought I was going to quit when Prime Minister Harper took the judge away.
So once again, what is the judge being asked to rule on?
Well, there's a number of things. One is when you do a lawsuit, the defendants have all kinds of abilities to kill you financially, emotionally, burn your heart out. And one of the things is filing endless motions to delay. So the regulator in the Alberta government, they filed motions to strike out paragraphs in my statement of claim. They didn't like the word contamination, but the water's contaminated. They said we shouldn't be allowed to use that word. They also didn't like that we were talking about all the other water contaminated in my community. I'm not the only one. I'm the only one suing. But they wanted all references to the hamlet and other people struck. The regulator, they argued a motion that they shouldn't have to respect a Canadian's charter rights if they're a terrorist. They actually put that into a legal brief.
If they're a
terrorist.
like you.
Yeah, me. They put in writing that I'm a terrorist in their legal brief filed in the court with no evidence. My lawyers said this is so bad because that's against the law. You can't go making stuff up about somebody with some kind of...
And this is coming from the government?
The regulator, the energy regulator, which really is a point, I mean, they're supposed to serve the public interest. And they have no evidence.
They don't.
Right, and they have no evidence of calling me a terrorist. I was never charged, I've never been arrested, I have no criminal record. And they did that in an official legal brief. And they used that argument to say that they can violate a Canadian's Charter of Rights. Because they violated my Charter of Rights in writing. When I was trying to present the evidence of non-compliance to the regulator, they wrote a very nasty letter trying to intimidate me. They ruled me making criminal threats without evidence, copied the police, and...
You said you made criminal threats
Yeah.
against them?
Well, yes, and the public. I was a threat to the public, but the police never came and fingerprinted me or threw me in jail. And they signed this letter. So for my lawsuit, it's a very important part of the lawsuit because I have a signed document of the regulator, like your Oil and Gas Commission in BC, the regulator violating a citizen's rights instead of holding Encana tight to the law and the regulations. They let Encana break the law. I didn't break the law, and yet they treat me like a criminal.
And once again, we see the corporations, their politicians, and their media. And I mean, it's getting to the point of life and death, because where do you go to hide? I mean, you're in Rosebud, Alberta, and they're coming after you, you know, to the point where they're poisoning your water.
Well, and not only that, when W5 aired a very small segment on my water and the bad treatment I received from the regulator, right 2 days later, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came and intimidated me and tried to harass me for a week. They called themselves Harper's new anti-terrorist squad, and I caught them lying to me. They came to interrogate, even though my lawyers said, hey, Jessica's been through enough. We'll come to you. If you have questions, we'll give you all the help you need. They tried to tell me they wanted me to help them train the officers in the anti-terrorist squad. That's how they were trying to get in the front door. This is Canada.
And Canada is the terrorist.
That's right. I said to the police who interrogated me, I said, have you gone to the regulator, the government, and Encana? Have you asked them about what Encana did to the Rosebud aquifers? They fracked right into a community's water supply. With hydraulic fracturing, they promised they'll be way below where the fresh water is, our drinking water supply. They fracked right into it. And I have the data to prove it. But the police don't go to Encana to ask them why they did such a criminal thing.
And why not?
I believe the police in Canada are now controlled by Prime Minister Harper, and by they're in position to protect corrupt politicians, corrupt regulators, but also oil and gas companies that are breaking the law.
So I would agree. The police, one of the jobs of the police is to protect corrupt politicians, corporations, and regulators who refuse to regulate on our behalf.
That's right.
I mean, this is what the country's come to.
But it's not just that, Jack. I think that's part of it. The other part of it is, this is why I don't believe hydraulic fracturing is safe. If fracking were safe, they wouldn't need to do these things. If truly fracking were safe and had never contaminated water anywhere, which is a big lie, they wouldn't have sent the police after me. They wouldn't have had a regulator lawyer harass me and bully me. They would have, Encana would have admitted their error and been held accountable and mitigated the problem. But because of the bad things they're doing, to me that shows, as a scientist that's worked in this industry, that's what shows to me that fracking cannot be made safe.
How big is fracking in this country?
Huge.
Okay, tell us, because nobody knows. We never hear about it.
No. In Quebec, for example, a couple years ago, they had done 31 wells. Some of them weren't even fracked yet, and they were already leaking methane. Half of them, more than half of them, were leaking methane. The government told the companies, fix the leaks. The companies tried, they couldn't. They now have a short-term moratorium ban, depends on who you talk to, what they're calling it. But the companies want to frack for oil there, and they're already putting big pressure on the Quebec government. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, big protests in New Brunswick. They want to keep fracking out. Ontario, the Tax Assessment Review Board already stated a couple years ago, a methane contaminated property, you can't tax it. Zero value, it's a hazard. Manitoba, they're doing a lot of fracking. They've got problems already. Saskatchewan, Alberta, of course, British Columbia.
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare,
it
an
is.
environmental nightmare. The media won't report on it.
That's right.
Here in BC, Christy Clark tells us it's the way forward. It's the road to safety and prosperity for us all. What's wrong with that woman?
Well, it's not just Christy Clark. It's all the politicians right now. We were promised jobs too in my community. There was one job, hauling the toxic waste. For British Columbia people, they're fracking in southeast British Columbia as well. There's apparently large holdings in central British Columbia where lots of people go to retire. Kelowna area, water shortages. Vancouver Island, they're planning to frack also.
I think we're out of time. Jessica Ernst, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much for doing this fight on behalf of all of us. It's you know.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
Thank you, Mehdi. Thank you, Walt.